Hi, I'm Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Christy, and we work with Globe International.
Working with missionaries, we hear stories of the struggles, the humor, God's goodness, and a little side of crazy.
Hey, that's who we are.
This is Crazy Missionary Stories. Hello and welcome back to Crazy Missionary Stories. Today we are talking with Dr. Andy Yarborough, who is a clinical psychologist and has been doing that for 20 years. So Dr. Andy, will you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a clinical psychologist, and my wife and I own a practice in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Those Cajuns, crazy Cajuns. Well, we love Baton Rouge, and it's a pretty cool. It's an interdisciplinary practice. We've got psychology, neuropsychology, social work, counselors, medical, educational specialists, and just learning how to do that better and better in our community. But we also serve pastors and missionaries. And so my dad's a pastor, my brother's a pastor, my father-in-law is a pastor, my brother-in-law is a pastor. Wow. And I've been on staff at multiple churches through the years, leading song worship and different things. And so from setting up in gyms to churches that have multi-campuses. And so just a lot there. But it was actually missions that got me into psychology.
Really?
Yep.
How'd that happen?
So I was a biology major. And so I had a buddy that said, hey, I was 19 years old, never been out of the country. And I had a buddy who played basketball where I was at school. He said, hey, we're going to go on this mission trip. We're going to play basketball. We're going to play their national teams, their junior national teams, some of their universities. We're going to put on clinics for some of their upper middle schools. And I thought, oh, that sounds amazing. Where are you going? He said, India. And I was like, you're an idiot. I was like, I'm not going to India. And I wasn't even really walking with the Lord at the time. My dad's amazing. So I didn't have like church hurt, that a lot of people experience where their dad's a pastor, dad was, hurtful or abusive. My dad is amazing. I have a great relationship with my dad. So it was more of my own faith journey that had taken me a roundabout way. And so I was like, dude, you've lost your mind. Well, next thing I know, I'm getting off a plane in southern India, and we're there to play basketball and tell people about Jesus. And it was unbelievable, but it also destroyed me. I really actually failed out of college when I got back. So there was no debrief. There was none of that. And so if it weren't for Mississippi College and the leadership at Mississippi College, I should have been done with undergrad. Wow. And this one question kept resonating: what does it mean to worship God even when we suffer? And because suffering is never the end for the believer, but we need a theology of it that's meaningful. And so after probably, really jacking up my future as a medical doctor, because I just quit going to class. I couldn't handle, I changed to psychology, and now I'm sitting across from the both of you. But that early experience and my history with church, people would start referring to us, and so I'd start building relationships. And in 2015, the CEO of a missions organization reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to connect with you. And I'm still working with that organization, and we've known Bob and Melissa forever. And so Bob had reached out at some point a few years ago and said, hey, are you interested in connecting with us? And it was like, absolutely. And so our mission is we guide people into hope, wellness, and life. And we want missionaries to be healthy, to be able to thrive, to stay on the mission field, for that to be sustainable for them. And to see holistic self-care not as selfishness, but as actually stewardship and an act of worship, as a facet of self-leadership and our role in working out our salvation. There's a lot to unpack there, but that's what I do.
Yeah, so Bob and Melissa are our directors of member care. Yeah. And so in reaching out to you, you have now, has it been 2 years that you've been helping our member care? 3 years that you've been helping our member care team.
Two or three, because some of it was informal. But yeah.
It's really neat that you got into the whole psychology realm because of missions, and now you're back in missions and helping missionaries and mission agencies What does it look like if somebody, I don't know how to unpack that. Can you unpack a little bit about what you shared about holistic self-care?
Yes.
As a missionary specifically, what does that look like?
Well, the gospel is not just about us surviving. It's about us thriving. And the idea is that we don't have to wait for God's kingdom. We get to represent his kingdom now. And obviously things aren't going to be made perfect until we see him face to face. But the goal is that we are taking Christ into the world as outposts of his kingdom. And I was getting a lot of calls about survival. People are crashing and burning. They're making terrible decisions. Some of it wasn't sin, right? Some of it was affairs and things like that, or like mismanagement of finances, or things would just blow up, abusive behavior. But some of it was just burnout. A lot of it was just missionaries who love God, love people, but didn't know how to steward rhythms of life well. And so I just got a little tired of helping people survive. And thought, look, there's always going to be a place for that, but what if we switched and we started having the mindset of Christ when he said, but seek first the kingdom of God and being right in relationship with him, and everything else will be added to you. What you seek first organizes the rest of your life. So if you're seeking first a solution to why you just crashed and burned is still organizing your life. What if we switched gears on that and let that spiritual principle impact our soul? And Bob Hamp talks about this. He's a therapist, and that phrase, what you seek first organizes the rest of your life, I got from Bob. Great therapist in Texas. But what if we switched the focus and taught people, which is a biblical model, about what it means to thrive, what it means to foster health, what it means to thrive and foster health. And that's what we've been doing. Because you can do it. Do we have to deal with trauma? Yes. There's a lot of things missionaries don't think are traumatic. It's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's pretty destabilizing and traumatic. But
yeah, we hear a lot of those stories on this podcast.
Oh man, it's so much that missionaries go through that we minimize. But there's a way to not only not minimize and deal with it, but there's a way to be able to focus on what it means to thrive wherever you are.
I asked you a little bit before we got started, but I'd love to hear. So I asked you if you are a Christian counselor.
Yeah.
Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, people ask me a lot, are you a Christian counselor, are you a Christian psychologist? And the answer is, I don't know. No. I'm a Christ follower. And people are going to disagree with me on this. But what I found is, while there is developing research in what it means to be a Christian psychologist or a Christian counselor, there's still a bit of a paucity of that literature out there. And what I found is that people will often put Christian in front of their vocation, but not consider what that really means, nor do the work it takes to know how to really integrate that. And so, like, you don't hear people saying, I'm a Christian neurosurgeon.
Right.
A neurosurgeon will say, I'm a Christian, period. And who I am as a Christ follower informs how I pray for you, informs how I engage you, informs. So I talk a lot about what it means for me to be a Christ follower. John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way, is probably the resource that I'll talk most about, because I feel like he integrates a lot of the ancient tradition of what it means to follow Jesus into what it means to be a disciple, what it really means to be a disciple. And so that's how I think about who I am and my identity, and it flows into my vocation of psychology. To do things from a Christian worldview, a Christian framework is a biblical framework to integrate spiritual formation and soul care. Very important to us. But that doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily identify as a Christian psychologist. You can throw that on the front of your vocation, but not really know how to steward that well. So, does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yep. Yeah.
And I'm not mad at people who do that. Let me just say, I'm not knocking, I'm not like, coming down on people that decide that they want to do that. More power to them. Just for me, it's easier for me to say I'm a Christ follower who is a psychologist, and that's how I engage the world in my worship vocationally. and then the work to really integrate that.
You mentioned a little bit about your trip to India.
Yeah.
And that really kind of sparked kind of a life change for you.
Yes.
Could you dive into that a little bit more if you're comfortable?
Yeah. So I'm 19 years old, sophomore at Mississippi College, and some buddies said, "Hey, we're going to go play basketball in India." And so, I was like, "You're crazy." And the next thing I know.
So I want to know also why were you like, "No way, I'm going to India." What was your?
I had no real worldview. Okay. I'm from Bogota, Mississippi. I grew up milking cows, right? Like I'm not thinking about India. The most I'd ever really traveled outside of the deeper South was Washington, D.C. as a senior in high school. And so it wasn't that I was opposed to it. It was more like just, like, India? You guys lost your mind. Like, why do you want to play basketball in India? Much less like, I wasn't an atheist by any means, but more moving in the direction of agnosticism at the time, because I just was like, I don't know. And I'm not proud of that, but that was my journey. Yeah. And so, they just kind of talked me into it more than anything. Like, dude, you need to come, raise the money, you need to come. So I'm like, okay, I had quit basketball, I was done with it, and I was like, what are we doing? But there's this thing in me that was like, you need to go, and I want to tear up talking. It changed my life because you get there. Great relationship with mom and dad, great relationship with my siblings. I show up, and I've seen poverty, but nothing like what we saw, and the level of suffering that we saw it. They introduced us to the human sex trafficking industry. In fact, one of the missionaries there, when he first started working, he would walk into some of those spaces, women would start taking their clothes off, and he'd say, no. Here's money, what do you need? And he'd get beat up. His name was Anson Thomas. He'd get beat up, and he said one point, Anson told us he was walking away. They beat him up pretty bad, and he just felt empowered by the Holy Spirit. He turned around and just went right back. Wow. And finally, after like 20 years of doing this, a lot of the pimps in the area, the traffickers in the area, they just left him alone. So he and his wife had adopted a lot of kids, had a ministry to a lot of kids, and they just ministered to women and children in that area, and had led a lot of people to Jesus, and were discipling those people. And that's who I was hanging out with. 19 years old, Bogota, Mississippi. I'm seeing this stuff for the first time, and it was amazing. I've got some Bogota, Mississippi has zero traffic, right? Even going to school at Mississippi College, Clinton, Mississippi is like, okay, right? Man, we were on this bus, and this dude was bobbing and weaving. He was in and out looking at oncoming traffic, and I was just like gripping seats going, Jesus. I think that's when my faith started really coming back to me. Help me, Jesus. But we got on the mosquito bus because mosquitoes were everywhere. So it was scary. People would be on these little moped scooters, and they're bobbing and weaving in, driving directly at the bus like we were playing chicken, and then weaving back in. Another funny story, the very first basketball game we finished in Chennai, we finished, I'm hot, and somebody puts this hot beverage in front of me, and I was like, oh Lord, I can't drink this. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I tried it, it was real legit chai. Oh. And I fell in love. Wow. So I have this deep love for buttered naan and real chai that it was so good. But there were some significant highs. I mean, we really had an amazing trip, met some amazing people. One of the missionaries there, his name was Bruce Lee.
Really?
Yeah. His parents named him after Bruce Lee.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and these were local believers. They weren't like missionaries, like American or European missionaries. These were believers, Indian believers we were working with. And so, they were hilarious. But I learned the hard way that you don't just eat everything you see. Oh, that's another. You talk about a crazy missionary story. That was brutal.
Can we hear it?
Well, I mean, when you don't really get that, hey, you aren't supposed to eat everything you see, and then you also don't realize how to squat well. You think, oh, I'm not feeling well, and I'm at least gonna have something to sit on. Oh no. And they don't even provide leverage. Like if it was coming out of the ceiling, you could hold a rope or something. No. So, yeah, squatty potties all the way. 19 years old, using squat. The other thing, the very first place that we stayed though, oh God. So I was clueless. So we walk in and they had toilets like we were used to at the time. They weren't squatties. I'm like, oh, thank God, this is amazing. Which is why I had the misconception that every place I was going to have access to this. But there was a bucket next to the toilet. And I thought, this is awesome. So I washed my clothes in it for the 4 days we were there. And I kept wondering why the staff were looking at me funny. I was soaking my clothes in there, like whatever.
Next to the toilet.
Yes, for those who don't realize, everybody, mostly everybody who's listening to this is going to realize Andy really is an idiot. You were supposed to use toilet tissue in there. And so I was just washing my uniform, my basketball uniforms and soaking them up. And it's like, oh God. And I didn't realize, it was only years later that I realized.
Did you have a funny odor on your clothes?
No. I think the good news was that they had cleaned it before they had put it. But, so it was clean, which is part of why I was like,
What's the problem?
I don't know why this bucket's here. Random bucket. I need to wash my clothes. Worked out.
Meanwhile, you were flushing your toilet paper.
Yes. I was like, yeah.
Creating a potential problem.
I was an agent of chaos. Yeah, they were like, this American. I know. Anyway, I forgot what the question was.
I did too.
India.
Yeah, India.
And how, yeah.
So the cultural impact of what we saw and what we experienced, who we talked to, didn't really hit me until we got back. And, it's late 90s. There was no debrief. There was no, hey, let's talk about what you saw. And so we just went right back into society, which is what has happened to missionaries forever. And I couldn't handle it. I didn't know how to handle it. And so I took all my sports stuff off my walls. I started giving away clothes. I quit going to class until they had to call me in. But hey, you've missed the allotted number. You're technically supposed to fail this class. Like, what's going on? And so if it weren't for the dean of students who worked with me after I told him what was happening, I didn't even know how to articulate what was happening. He was like, man, you can take 1 hour, not even one class, 1 hour, and you can stay in the dorms and we'll figure this out together. They should have kicked me out of the dorms and I should have been done. But they treated me as a person and really worked with me. And one of my professors was like, look, if you just can take the classes, come to class and just pass, I'll give you a C. Wow. So he gave me a C. Because I was supposed to have already failed. He was like, just come to class, whatever. He's like, I'll pass you and we can keep moving forward. So he passed me, and my other professors did the same. And in that semester of me trying to figure out what my next step was, I started looking into psychology because this question like suffering. What does it mean I don't even know if I believe in this same God, but the faith that I see in these missionaries is the same faith I see in my mom and dad. And so there was a connection, but I see it in such a great level of suffering, that is like something's here. And so it really kicked off, reignited my own faith journey. And I changed my major to psychology. And here I am.
I'm assuming you also got counseling in the meantime?
No.
No. Just knowing that you were going to be able to help in some way helped you process through it, or?
I don't know what helped me. I think I'm in counseling now. I have a therapist now. But there were things that impacted me then that I think still impacted me almost 20 years later. I don't think I ever dealt with it. And so it was a significant, it's hard for me to understate the significant impact that it had on me. I'm not the same person. So, I mean, I'm also 45, and that was when I was 19, so obviously I'd change anyway. But the trajectory of where I would be is very different.
So you saw the need for someone who's in another country, sees some crazy things. You saw the need for a debrief, and I've just been feeling like that's kind of just now coming up with missionaries. Like, we need to have this in place for people who are coming back to the States. They need to deal with their trauma. How can you encourage, because a lot of times it will be the missionary who has to kind of be like, hey, I need debriefing. How can you encourage a missionary who is maybe coming back from the field or going through some type of transition to reach out to someone like yourself and just get the help that they need?
Not all debriefs are created equally. So let me just say that. So sometimes debriefs can make things worse.
How so?
Well, if you, for example, if you don't know how to integrate the body into the treatment process, you could talk about it, but not have the skill sets to regulate it. So now what you've done is you opened it up without stabilizing. So sometimes also debriefs are done, really you want to be sure people are stable. If people aren't stable, like if their environment's not stable, whatever, you don't necessarily want to open up that can. But if you can identify that people are stable in that moment, they're not currently in the trauma, and you can teach people the skill sets that they need to manage it first. So I think a lot of debriefs are really, ideally, are built into a culture of well-being. And that culture of well-being, when people debrief, they pull from what they've learned in their cultures, from their member care teams, from whatever that looks like, and then they're able to talk about or debrief particular experiences within the context of a broader idea of well-being and trauma-informed missionary coaching. Does that make sense? Yes. And so if you just go in and start debriefing, but people don't have any framework for it, well, now you're reliving, your body starts reliving these things, and you think, oh, I've prayed through it. But obviously prayer is crucial, but you've got to integrate the body. And does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's more of like a process. You have to already kind of be in that before you can really debrief. So member care, like in our world, member care is so important for a missions agency, for missionaries. Could you just speak to how important it is that maybe there's a missionary out there who's listening to this and they are not part of an agency, or they don't have that like support of member care? What could you say to encourage them to just really like look into that?
Yeah. I think it starts with valuing it. You have to value well-being. And when I say well-being, I mean holistic well-being. We are bio-psycho-socio-spiritual beings, period. We have a body, soul, relationships, and spirit. And I think where we've messed up in the past is we've tried to spiritualize soul issues or spiritualize everything spiritual, but everything is also holistic. And so I think that's where you see a lot of people struggle, is they'll engage spiritually, but they won't take responsibility for their part. So they abdicate their responsibility for health to a spiritual dimension, not realizing like, no, I've got a part in my sanctification that I have to to play. And so valuing holistic self-care is to say, I'm going to value my spiritual formation, not just for ministry, but for my own spiritual formation. I'm going to value my own soul care. That's not selfishness. I'm going to value my own soul care. I'm going to value my physical health, and I'm going to value my relational health. And then I'm going to value how that moves into my vocational health and other areas. And so self-care is not, we think of selfishness sometimes because the world tends to see self-care as the mission. But for us as believers, as Christ followers, it's just a strategy. Because there will be times we suffer. And good self-care isn't about happiness, although I want everybody to be happy. Sometimes good self-care is endurance. It's perseverance. It's knowing the mission and why it's important. And we go through the suffering, not run away from it. And we invite Christ into that, and we're transformed in that process. So self-care isn't just about being happy. It's about stewarding what God's given us to accomplish His call in our lives. And when you value that, if you're not a part of a member of an organization that has member care, when you value it, you can set up your own care. And there's ways to do that. Look, if you're not a part of Globe and you're watching this, you could consult, call and consult. Send an email to Globe and say, hey, can somebody walk me through or give me a sense of what it would mean for me to structure some of this? But be sure you got the right spiritual formation, soul care, physical health, and relational health systems in place.
When you say soul care, what does that look like? What's that mean?
Yeah, so there's kind of 3 areas of soul care. Recognizing that our soul, in practical terms, is our mind, our will, and our emotions. Mind is not just what we think, it's how we think. The will is the mechanism of the soul that makes decisions. It's our agency. If I feel like I'm losing agency, if I feel like I'm losing my capacity to make decisions, helplessness sets in. Hopelessness is not far behind. So recognizing I may not have control over certain situations, but I do constantly have a choice. Viktor Frankl said, who survived Auschwitz, said that they could take everything from me but my will to live. Oof. You talk about that is the most fundamental act of agency. You cannot take away from me I choose to want to live. Oh my God. Wow. But that finding agency engages the will and then our emotions. And emotions are very important. I don't remember where I heard this, or I'd give credit where credit's due, but emotions are amazing consultants, terrible CEOs. So in the church, sometimes in missions world, we'll be like, no, emotions are meaningless. They don't listen to them. But if you're angry, anger's communicating something to you. A boundary line's been crossed, a value's been violated, an expectation hasn't been met. If you don't pay attention to that, then you're basically denying your ability to confess it and hear from the Lord what that emotion, and hear from that emotion what it's really actually trying to say. If you feel insecure and you avoid that emotion because I'm in Christ, but insecurity a lot of times communicates. Part of the reason I'm trauma informed as a psychologist is I listen to insecurity because the insecurities tell me you need more training. Does that make sense? And so soul care is about fostering correct agency, knowing where my decisions are. How do I leverage the will that has now been made alive in Christ Jesus? How do I steward that will? Emotional health and maturity, knowing how to manage that emotional health and maturity piece. And then having fun. And that gets lost on missionaries.
Having fun, yeah.
Having fun.
Why is having fun so important?
So your brain rests when it's focused. And you have to give your brain and body a break from the constant pressure of life, period, no matter who you are. And what fun does is it frees your mind up to rest. You have to have fun. And so I'll hear people say, pastors, missionaries, especially missionaries, I can't have fun. If I'm having fun, I'm not identifying with the suffering of the community I'm in. And in fact, your community doesn't need you to fully identify with their pain. They're in it already. You're going to be a light. You need to do more than just fully identify with suffering. I think leaning in and knowing how to have fun and engage brings a level of what it means to be a part of the kingdom as if Jesus didn't laugh and have fun in his journey to the cross. For the joy and for the joy set before him, he endured it. So I think the fun piece is really, really important. So agency, where are those decisions? I may not have control over a situation, but I have a choice in here somewhere. And Lord, what do you want me to do with that will? What do you want me to do? The scriptures equip us, the Spirit empowers us, but we have to steward that core self in us to make those decisions. Second is emotional health and maturity. Learn how to manage, listen to emotion. Present that to the Lord. Understand that we have parts. Some parts are healthy, some parts aren't. And doing parts work, which is a whole other conversation. And then having fun.
Wow, I love that. So tell us how we can find you. Tell us all the things you're doing. Just give some shameless plugs.
Okay, well, thank you. So if you can contact us directly through mywellclinic.com. mywellclinic.com. It has all of our resources on there. And I have a podcast, My Well Lab. And it talks a lot about holistic self-care. And then we have something called Rhythms. It's myrhythms.life. It's a course that as an individual you can purchase. It's just a one-time cost, but you have ongoing access to it. And we add videos and workbooks. There's a video series and workbooks that help you develop holistic self-care in a bunch of really important areas. There's tons of others. As we write ebooks, those go on there. You can get on once a month live with us and ask questions. And that's available to anybody that's got access to Rhythms. And if you're an organization, we just figured out our licensing agreement. So if you've got 9 or less people as a part of your organization, for $250 a month, everybody in your entire organization has access to Rhythms. Wow. So they can hop on. The live helps a lot because it's not static in that sense. It's not a course. It's evolving. We're constantly adding courses. You can hop on live and interact. So a lot of opportunity there.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Globe members also have access at least for a period of time. Is that correct? So if you're a Globe missionary and you've not been involved with the Rhythms course,
reach out to Member Care and get that information. myrhythms.life, but there's a way Globe can sign up.
Wow.
Yeah, I personally, I listened to your podcast. I was even just listening to it this morning, and I was realizing a lot of the things, I've been in a lot of your teachings as well with the Member Care team. Yep. A lot of what you're teaching us is right there on your podcast.
Yes,
so
it is.
People can learn the things that you're teaching professionally to other people to help them in what they're doing just by listening to your podcast.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Yep.
So I'll put all the links in the show notes so anybody can access and get to it easily. But I think we're coming up on our time here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
For missing your lunch break for this. We really appreciate it.
I shoved down 2 street tacos on the way home. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Andy, too, for all you do. I have personally been someone who has received from your skills and talents and your giftedness, and just what you teach is effective. And I want to thank you for that personally. And just as an agency, you are helping us and blessing our Member Care team by all the things you're teaching us that we can put into practice with our missionaries. So thank you for taking your time to bless us.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Crazy Missionary Stories.
If you're listening on Spotify, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, do the same. And on YouTube, subscribe to us and give us a like. And of course, share it with your friends and family. We'll see you next time.